Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Constructive Criticism. This is episode 437. I'm your host, Easy. I'm joined by my co-hosts, a man who is celebrating the second day of Hanukkah, Abe Stein.
That's me. Happy Hanukkah, everyone.
And a man who has never lit a candle in his life, Mason Clark.
That's true. I love scented candles. They're great.
That's
they bring
fair.
a lot of je ne sais quoi to the room.
That's fair.
So.
You know?
And I've lit candles before with my Jewish friends. So I've done it all.
Dude, that's so dope.
Yeah.
That's so dope. You know what else is dope is our main topic today. Today we're going to be talking about things that you can pre-plan for. And I'm really excited to do that. Abe, you look like you wanted to say something there, though.
I just want to give big props to Mason for being a well-rounded candle lover. That's all.
Dude, that's so dope. Funnily enough, I actually think the Magic community has done this to me too, where I have way more I don't know, maybe we should just give a shout out to the Magic community for introducing people to different aspects and areas of life, because I also have way more Jewish friends, way more Muslim friends, just the overall culture that I get to digest is way bigger because of Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, it's huge. Really awesome.
So that being said, before we get into the things that you can pre-plan for, which I'm sure Abe, you pre-planned all the gifts for Hanukkah this year. Let's talk about always improving. It is the point of the show. Abe, we want you to go first. What did you do to improve at Magic or life this week?
Yeah, so my always improving mode actually came from a coaching session that I did with just patron of the show, Evan Appleton. He's great. We started doing regular coaching, really building around his fundamentals and how he was thinking about the game. And in one of the conversations we were having about setting goals for him improving his play was going back and covering the 4 dimensions of thought as I kind of learned them from reading Next Level Magic when I was in high school, which is thinking about games from front to back, from back to front, from top to bottom, and bottom to top. And something I never really appreciated about thinking about things from a bird's eye view or from a ground level view in bottom to top and top to bottom is really how much more now I think about games from the bottom to top level. And what I mean by that is really realizing how much more I'm starting to focus on the impact that an individual card is shaping the game with, what a Renin 6 in play means for the game compared to a draw where it doesn't have it is something that is really a part of that bottom and top distinction. I really appreciate what that meant in that context before and how to use those directions of thinking about problems to how they apply to games. And then I've really just been thinking about how I'm going to use that new appreciation of that concept to really push forward the way that I'm thinking about the games I'm playing, because it's something I've been doing, but by putting in context of that in the same way I put in context thinking about games back to front of what's my end game, how am I playing towards that, what is it I need to do to get to that end game from where I am, the same way of okay, this is what the game looks like right now from the small point of view. What are the plays I can make that leverage that is really somewhere I'm focusing my attention this week.
Did you find when you were thinking about this, as you were talking about it, I thought this, so that's why I'm asking this question, that the overall power level of cards and their increase over the last few years changed the way that you should and could and would think about this?
So I think that it's definitely true that the reason that I've started to think about it more is that, especially with Modern Horizons 2 and then the modern format as a whole, so many more of the games come down to single really powerful cards or sets of powerful cards interacting with the game. So you have games that are decided for Hammer because you have a Sigarda's Aid or an Urza Saga, or the amount of game plans that are enabled or the implications on a game that are created by single cards is just much more now than it used to be. It would be, and it's much earlier in the game too. Many years ago, it'd be the game didn't really, it was about getting this Jace into play. And then it's really about the turns where Jace is in play and brainstorming versus the turns where the the players trying to keep it off the table, and things like that mattered a lot more. And it was a lot less about the individual cards impacting the game. But that definitely feels like more the case now than it was maybe even 3 to 5 years ago, where in standard, it would be like, oh well, they cast an Oko on turn 3, and that changed the entire game, and that was like really broken. But even when it was less broken than that, it could be like, well, they cast Nissa, who shakes the world, and now they're in the really, really advanced position because a card like this changes so much about the game. Whereas before it was a lot less like that. The Ragtusk didn't really change the shape of the game to that degree for so many turns.
It's interesting having you talk about that, because when you were describing it, I was thinking about how standard is sort of analogous to that, where often a singular card will change everything and kind of the whole game revolves around it. And the first memory I have it, I believe this card came out first, was Scarab God and Teferi 5. Those are like the two that stick out to me. I can't remember which one came first. I think it's Scarab God. But regardless, that's the first thing that I can remember. My lineage in the game is much shorter than y'all's. But yeah, that's a card where it's like it sticks and everything sort of warps around. Can you answer this? What happens if this hits the board?
Yeah.
In a way that is different than something like Thragtusk.
No, I think that the earliest that my memory of this is actually the one that Abe said, which is like Jace the Mind Sculptor, like where the whole game became about the whole format became about Jace, and I think that Scarab God is actually a really good, another one that like the game changes once you untap with a Scarab God, so you either have to make that not happen or you have to plan accordingly. And I think that the same thing is true of like Ren and 6. Like if they're untapping with Ren and 6, they're getting a second activation. What does the game look like now? And like I think that's the thing, right? Like once you untap with those type of cards, the game becomes about those cards.
Yeah, and I think especially Planeswalkers play into this because there's kind of like a real modal nature to what makes a card really impactful in a game. Like for me, I think about it a lot about like in the same way Esper Sentinel or Urza Saga, where it presents a real set of decisions and pinches on the opponent to like deal with what is going to be presented by this, which can be a range of problems in this short period of time and what that means about the game. And it can even be as simple as like, in a game of limited, your opponent having a 2/2 flyer can mean everything about a game because it means that they're going to attack you for 2 like 10 times, and that's a real threat to you. And so it doesn't have to be some insanely powerful, mythic rare for it to be a card that when it's in play is shaping the game, or the threat of it is shaping the game. But it definitely feels like these days it's more and more common, and maybe it's just that I'm noticing it more since I'm thinking about the games in this way more. It's just more of something that I notice.
Yeah, I hate to pile out of this one, but I actually think that what's the name of I'm losing track of things because I'm playing too many formats. The green 4/4 in
Old Growth Troll.
Yeah, Old Growth Troll actually does this a lot, where like the game revolves around if you untap with it and you have a Nykthos or you don't have a Nykthos, or they kill it and then you get the mana. Like the game becomes about how early did you play that and what did the game look like for that. So I actually think that your point there, Abe, is, I don't know, I think it's really astute.
Yeah, and in the same way, I think it's like Nykthos is a big part of that too, right? When they have a Nykthos showing, like it almost doesn't really matter to you if you're killing that. Most time doesn't matter to you if you're killing that Old Growth Troll to try to like get in damage, or if you have the opportunity to spend your entire like hand trying to exile it. Like getting one good exchange there can mean a huge difference because of the presence of Nykthos, rather than maybe just trying to avoid that exchange. But
Mason, what about you? What's your always improving moment this week?
Yeah, it's kind of. I guess I'll ask this to the listeners, and I'll ask this to y'all too, and you don't have to answer. You can just think about the answer to yourself, and we can talk about it if you want it later. But it's something that I got from kind of talking to someone in coaching and sort of thinking about Magic in general. It's, do you have something to prove? And if you're listening to podcasts, you two guys, think about it. Is there something you're trying to prove and you're trying to get done? And I think there are a lot of different things, and this statement is kind of broad, and there are a lot of different ways you can interpret it. Personally, the kind of thing that when I think about this is like, do you have something to prove to others specifically, not just to yourself, but like, are you trying to prove something to people, and sort of like get something across, like I'm this good, or I should be respected, or I should be listened to, or I should be heard. And I think that it's something that if it is taken and handled the wrong way and sort of looked at in the wrong light can be really detrimental to a lot of people and creates sort of a vicious cycle. And it was really helpful to sort of just sit down and talk to this person and sort of just talk to them about like, hey, yes, it is good to like push yourself and have goals and stuff like that. But if your goals are contingent on other people validating you or making you feel this sort of way, it's like potentially really dangerous because there's no guarantee they'll do that or they ever even, maybe they would, they just don't even know you, you know? Like, to give an absurd example, maybe the goal is like, yeah, I just really want Reed Duke to think I'm like an amazing Magic player. And it's like, maybe Reed Duke would if he got to know you and have a conversation, do something, but like, what's the odd Reed Duke's ever going to even find you? You know, especially if you're not doing something about it. So that was just a conversation I had with someone. And I think it was really helpful and it was really good to sort of get to talk about that thing that we kind of allude to a lot of Magic. I think a lot of people know, but maybe we just don't talk about enough. It's something that is sort of just not mentioned. And so
I think this is really important. I know that I struggled with this multiple times in the past. And honestly, like, imposter syndrome is really hard, especially in Magic. I think a lot of people feel it. And I had a really good conversation with former coach John Stern. It was after he had quit Magic. We were just hanging out, like we were talking about TV shows and movies. We were just hanging out during the pandemic after he had left the show, and he really put things in perspective for me of like, you don't know other people's situations, you don't know other people's goals, you don't know anything when that would matter when it comes to this type of stuff. What you do know is your own situation, what is reasonable for your own goals, and what is reasonable for your own success. And this came up because I'll be a little transparent. He said, I think you're better than former platinum pro, Spencer. And I was like, that's crazy. Let's look at the results. We looked at the results, and it turns out I actually had better results at Grand Prix and Pro Tours by percentage than that platinum pro. And I was like, oh, maybe perception of what other people think doesn't matter, and maybe your own perception might not even matter, because what actually matters is those things we highlighted earlier, right? Your own goals, your own limitations, and just, I don't know, being honest with yourself. I think it's a really good one, Mason.
Yeah, I mean, if this is something you want to hear more about, we really do talk about, a lot of this topic. I feel like in the episode we did on Mental Game just a couple weeks ago. But I definitely think that if you're putting yourself in a position to derive a majority of your satisfaction and gratification from Magic extrinsically from other sources, you're never going to be as happy as if you decide to do it intrinsically. If you do it because you want to do it and because you're trying to prove something to yourself, and even if you decided something you want to do but you don't want to do that bad for yourself, it's something you want to do that bad to prove someone else and like stick to someone else, at the end of it, the only value you're guaranteed to be left with is going to be your intrinsic value. And odds are, like, and I've been in these positions, you're not really even going to care at the point where it comes to fruition. You put in all this effort that you like stuck it to that guy, or did this thing to like prove everyone wrong, when it doesn't always come back that way, or even when it does, it doesn't feel as good as you think it will. So I think it's really, really important to remember, when you have things to prove, you really want to make sure it's something you want to prove to yourself.
I'll go next. So this week was really hard for me, like on a personal level. I had a sick kid. Me and my son both got the flu, and so excuse me, the level of like gaming that I would typically do and like the different things available to me was a little rough. Also, was doing coverage this weekend, got sick, couldn't even finish coverage this weekend. So it was like a rough week for Magic, but I tried to really make the most of it, and also make the most of like my time laying in bed sick and like stuff like that. And I'm gonna kind of piggyback onto a couple things. I had one of my very best friends, former host of the show, guest of the show, Quinn Pierce. He had like 9 top 8s or something for RCQs this season and didn't convert. And like, I gave him a call on the drive home. I was like, hey man, I just want you to know, like, I really appreciate your consistency. I really, I think that you did great. I'm really sorry that it didn't happen for you. But one of the things that came up in that conversation was just kind of this thought to me of understanding both what your own goals are and how what you can do applies to those. So Quinn is the type of person to really just take like a challenge winning deck list or a pro tour deck list and just jam it and then like change 1 or 2 cards. And that does not work in a lot of local metas, in my opinion. And one of the things that I've been doing this week is looking at our RCQ winning deck lists, like what is happening in my local meta and understanding what I need to worry about. Because my goal over the next few months is going to be qualifying for another RC. Like, my goal is to qualify for every RC that I can right now in Magic, and I'm doing a lot of things. I'm like figuring out the local formats. I'm looking at RC results from things like Canada and like where are people going to grab deck lists from, right? So like Pioneer, for example, Canada had the 2 of the last 4 RCs, and how are people going to do Pioneer if Pioneer's my next RCQ? Once again, though, like, what are the recent RCQ results? If the format is close to that, like, what did the metagame look like? What are people doing? Who are the players that I know of that are going to be at the next RCQ? And really getting back to, like, in my opinion, like, basic metagaming as far as, like, a local level. Because this is something that I used to do a lot, like, understanding what to expect, understanding sequencing of different formats, and then preparing for the right formats at the right times. So that's kind of been my always bring this week, is like really diving into stuff that I don't think that I normally would just for the podcast.
That's awesome. Yeah. The figuring out of like what's going on and like smaller metagames as well as larger metagames is one of the more interesting things I think in Magic. And it's really cool to kind of see how it changes week to week and also just the perceptions other have.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do this a lot in my local, and we talked about this it was more than a handful of months ago now, and like why I was sticking to Hammer even during the 4-color format was like, well, I know that locally no one's playing Money Pile. Rest in peace. Sorry, Mason.
Sorry, my bank.
But I know people play a ton of Murktide, and I feel favor in that matchup. And so if I know I'm going to play against Murktide a lot in my elimination rounds or in my late Swiss rounds, I'm well positioned for that. And even small things like that, where you know that the good players in your area gravitate towards a certain type of deck, being a little bit more prepared for it, even in just how you're spending your time to understand a matchup, or having that 15th sideboard card kind of lean in a little bit, or that last choice in your main deck lean in a little bit can be really valuable. And if you're not doing that, you are giving up that edge, especially if you're just
I'll give
the thing off moto.
I'll give some insight here. If you're a patron, you might have seen that. I don't actually know if my most recent list is updated, but like I've been playing a lot of Gruul vehicles the last 24 hours, and I have Obstinate Bailoff in my sideboard. One of the reasons for that is mono red is really prevalent in Pioneer in my local metagame, as is sack decks. Like, and what do people do on turn 2 on sack decks? They play Croxa, and man, is that a thing that beats Croxa. In fact, it even happened today. I actually played against mono red and Croxa today with this deck. Things that I expect in my local metagame in Pioneer, and it worked out both times. Like, had the Obstinate Bailoff, discarded it before I untapped on turn 2. I had 1 land in play and an Obstinate Baloth in play. It was yeah. Mason shaking his head for the listeners, like, it was disgusting.
Rest in peace.
They wind up in someone else's photo screenshot.
Honestly.
If you want to support the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. It is one of the best ways to support the show. And it helps a ton. We got a lot of supporters leading up to our last open. We'll announce the dates for the next open really soon. It means a lot to us. Every time we get that notification, it's like, I don't know, it almost feels like we did something right, like we helped the person. So head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. If you are looking for cards, though, and you're in the US, head over to Game Gridley Ice. The link is in the show notes for our affiliate link, but you can also just use the code CCMTG10 for 10% off your first order. And honestly, like, there was not a person that got store credit from our event for our, it was almost a 1K that was like, they didn't have what I needed. Like, everybody got what they needed. They're an amazing store to, like, get your cards. Mason has threatened to buy Salt Lake out of cards multiple times. He has to go to so many stores, including Game Red. Finally, last update. I think we mentioned this last week, but we have a swag store now for CCMTG. If you want a t-shirt, you want a water bottle, you want a desk mat, you want life pad, head on over to the swag store. This is another way to support the show where you maybe you don't want to do a reoccurring thing, but you just like want to support the show with like a t-shirt or however you want to do it. It's a great way to do that. Just go to constructivism.com, hit the swag button, and there will be a link right there. It's also in the show notes. So let's get into the main topic, though. Things you can pre-plan. Mason, if people are watching live, then they know that we discussed this before the show, that this has been a long time coming, man.
Yeah, I think this idea, the genesis of it was we were talking on the podcast, and I think you or Abe pitched a mulligan or whatnot, like of a hand or something like that, and I was like, well, did they have Lurrus or Yorion? And like the description, just like, did they show us anything? And then we got into this whole conversation about like pre-planning stuff and even like pre-game, like the actual game starting. There's so much you can do. And that's sort of, spiraled from just like as simple as like, oh, my opponent has maybe Yorion. So like in Pioneer, I know it's one of the maybe the more grindy decks versus like, oh, it's Giganta. Maybe it's one of these decks. To oh, there's no companion, maybe something like that. To a lot bigger, more relevant things across larger formats and just sort of, timelessly. I don't think Companion's probably gonna be a timeless part of Magic, but these things.
Yeah, I mean, eventually it'll be banned, right? Like, eventually it'll be gone.
That's what you should be on Twitter today. Is what I'm thinking.
You talk about Andy's tweet because anyway,
the Mar article. Maybe that's a Patreon post show.
All right. No, I think that like one of the reasons that the show changed is like this was brought up because of like the Lurrus format, and then now it's like, okay, well, Lurrus is gone, but is it not multi-format that you can gain information early or even before a game starts? Or yeah, I think that's the premise here. Let's talk about things before the event. Because there was I've been listening to a lot of First Strike lately, guys. Friends of the show, Andy and Derek. They're big proponents of like really hammering home, similar to me, like matchups and like what is truth in Pioneer. And I'm kind of curious what you guys think of like, is matchup knowledge something that before the event you are 100% accountable for? Like, this is just something before an event you get to know. Like, what is this matchup about?
Yeah. You go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say that you're prepared for an event if when you sit down and play a match of Magic against one of the top like in a deck like in a format like Pioneer, maybe like 5-10 decks, and Modern 5-10 decks, and you feel like you don't know what your plan is supposed to be, that is a huge signal to me that you did not come prepared to that event. You could have written on your sideboard guide. You could have, you could be like, oh, I'm just playing green. I know that I'm gonna, just play some Llanowar Elves and play some Karns and a Nykthos, and that's my thing. But if you don't have an idea of what's going on with your opponent in the game and what they're trying to accomplish, then you've really failed yourself in terms of things you could have planned for in the tournament, because those are going to just build an information base for you to make good decisions in game and really be thinking about the whole picture when you're playing. And I think that if you don't do that, across the board, you're really not taking the most advantage of the opportunity you have.
Mason, I actually think you with rest in peace, Yurion, myself with Murktide, and Abe with Hammer have all shown the ability to do this, right? Like, where all of us have been able to beat bad matchups and even say, like, here's our bad matchups, here's our plan for those bad matchups. What goes into that, though? Like, how does somebody come to those kind of conclusions before an event starts?
Yeah, and I'll start with this too. If hitting a bad matchup is stopping you from winning the tournament, you're gonna have a bad Magic career. You gotta be able to beat bad matchups to win a Magic tournament. If you don't, congratulations on getting very lucky. But regardless, it comes all down to format knowledge, and to have this sort of matchup knowledge. A little bit of that is, kind of doing the research, looking at the decks. But really, when you get to boil it down further, it's kind of format knowledge. I mean, like, okay, what's going on with the format? What are these decks doing? What are the kind of the pillars of the format? What are the key cards? What are the key interaction points? Like, what's the removal that's dominating the format? What am I allowed to do because of this removal? Does the format have sideboard options available to me? And all of that's very different and changes up format to format and allows for different types of decks to be playable and strong and allow you to sort of know what you need to do in each matchup. Because let's say, you're playing against some sort of Urza Saga affinity deck. Well, if that's the case, they might have certain things that are different from deck to deck, but the general idea of what they're doing, and you can apply that format knowledge to that individual matchup and have a good range of things that and you also have a good idea of what their most powerful things can be. Typically, the most powerful thing is the thing that is done in the most stock versions of decks. So really, you just have to worry about the more fringe stuff. And if you have the most powerful things down, you should be fine.
I actually think that what you just said is really key. You talked about stock versions, and I think that, like, the next point is around deck lists, and, like, whether it's your own deck list or actually just, like, what a deck list could reasonably look like. In a lot of cases, that is something you can know before an event starts. Like, I'll go to, like, Jerry T. Like, if there's a person that I know of that just literally goes and looks at too many deck lists, to be honest, like, no, not really. Like, you do you, Jerry. But this guy looks at like 300 deck lists a week, it feels like. Like, he's actually just looking at every deck list available, and that is something that is possible, right? Like, you can in fact know what the top performing decks in each format look like, Abe.
Yeah, and beyond even just knowing like what they look like, you can kind of get a sense for like what they could look like, right? There's a lot of times where there's variations in the way people build things. There are times where I remember a really, really impactful moment of this for me it was during the Bant Company format of Standard, where there were like certain people who built their mana base in one of the, I think it was in like the green black decks. So some way they built the mana base, or some way that they sideboarded in the mirror matches that would tell you a lot about what their sideboard looked like, or what their main deck like flex choices looked like if they were copying someone's deck list, because there was kind of like 2 or 3 camps going on. And so obviously arriving at that much knowledge is a lot of pre-preparation. You have to be like, oh, you played a fortified village, that means your deck has 2 Dramoka's Command. Like, that's a lot to really take in, and that's pretty advanced. But knowing that, sometimes you're again from an older standpoint, but sometimes your Mardu Vehicles opponent is just going to board in Fumigate because some of the decks do that, or some of your, for Pioneer, some of your Rakdos opponents will board in Sky Sovereign because that's a card that.
Well, can we go back to the Fumigate really quick though? Because like how your opponent plays could dictate if you've looked at 20 deck lists, right? How they play could be like, okay, they either boarded in Fumigate, they had it in their sideboard, they didn't. Like, or their hand just doesn't line up that way. But like, you get that information. That it like knowing that piece of information is what we're talking about. Where that Fumigate out of Mardu means X or Y according to how they're playing.
Yeah, it opens up the things that you can be thinking about in the game to know about those things you've thought about before the game, and especially when it comes to people's deck lists and the things you're playing around, or like what is their mid-range haymaker going to be, in some standard formats, or are they playing Shouldrids or Wandering Minds or whatever in standard Grixis right now? What is the way they're building their deck or could be building their deck, and what does that say about the rest of their deck? It can be something you can really learn by.
I actually think, Mason, that your 5-color deck was really good at this specific thing, at understanding what the top decks would look like, and then adjusting your packages to attack that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of the 4-color control deck, and I think it's like a really big part of Murktide sideboards now. But if you were going to play 4-color before, and honestly even more so now that your deck is weaker, you have to sort of understand what other people are bringing to the table. Otherwise, you can't have the right card, because it's a lot of it is lining up the cards well against their cards and kind of macro game planning, and sort of trying just to make sure that you're having good trades and you're available, that you have the right tools available to solve the problems at hand. And if you're not changing your tools, there isn't a one size fit all situation. You're gonna need a different type of wrench for different size screws, and same thing's true here.
You mentioned something really interesting, where you had packages in your main deck, but you also mentioned Murktide, right? Where it's sideboard, and how its sideboards is actually the key there. How do you guys think? And I'll go to you first, Dave. How do you think that like things before an event is what we're covering here? How do sideboard plans come into play here? Where, or how much of that ownership is on yourself? How much is it on format knowledge? What about format knowledge, matchup knowledge, deck list? But like at some point, you have to put pen to paper. People ask us for sideboard guides all the time, but at the end of the day, if you don't understand why you're doing it, what's going on?
Yeah, I think when it comes to pre-planning, one of the things that most people, and honestly the thing that I have thought about the most when I've thought about things you can pre-plan, the most obvious one to most people is like, oh, I can bring a sideboard guide to the tournament, I can know how it is I'm going to sideboard and all the matches I'm going to play against. That way I don't have to think about it in the game. But beyond that, when it comes to building those sideboard plans, that is something you're actively pre-planning, and the more that those other points we've already touched on get into that process for you, the better that plan when it comes to sideboarding is going to be, and the more that you think through not only your own sideboard plan but other deck sideboard plans against your deck. You take the time to plan out what the game is going to look like, or what the cards that are going to matter are going to be. That's going to help you make better decisions for when you show up to the tournament, better decisions for when you're playing the games. Like if you know that, this happened for a while with Magus of the Moon versus Blood Moon on Magic Online when Beseju was first printed. People immediately identified, a lot of really savvy Magic Online players decided, you know what? People are going to have a lot of Besejus and getting a lot of basic forest in the decks to play Beseju. And that's going to be how they're going to answer Blood Moon. So if I need a Blood Moon people, I actually want Magus of the Moon, because they're not going to have a lot of Lightning Bolts or Unholy Heats in those decks I'm trying to Blood Moon. And so I need to shut off their best interaction for this Blood Moon and instead have Magus. Or as time went on, people started to realize that, against 4-color, I don't even want to Blood Moon them, because I've played the matches, I've seen the matches play out where this card looks like it might be good, but they can just play in a way that makes those cards completely invalid and I'm wasting my time. So knowing things like that can happen, knowing the decks where Blood Moon might even be a possibility, and then being able to say, hey, I know that a lot of Murktide decks have Blood Moon. I know they might bring it against me. Let me fetch this basic land. Those are things that you could have absolutely pre-planned and known going into the start of that game, because you knew the deck coming in and you knew what your opponent was playing coming in and what was going to happen, that you just already know to do that and plan around doing that with the way you're sequencing your mana or keeping hands that only have fetch lands. Things like that can really come forth from that.
Yeah, and to hop on to kind of what Abe sort of mentioned there, but to really, I think, hammer it home, I think so often in content you will find people talking about sideboard plans, and they talk about what Abe just mentioned there, but also there's a lot of content out there for every deck, and you can spend time, like Abe mentioned, like, oh, they're going to have a bunch of Besagers, I should play Magus instead of Blood Moon. Even if you don't make those huge changes, just know what they're trying to do. If there's like a free guide out there where you can watch someone stream, or just like, try and get a condensed version of it, or just ask a question to someone, if like, oh, maybe not every Hammer player is doing this, but some Hammer players, do this sort of thing, you can get a much better idea of how they're planning, and that should update your plan. You don't want to just be like, well, I know Blood Moon's really good, so I'm gonna, play my Blood Moon into them, even though they probably have a bunch of sideboard cards for it. If that's the case, maybe you don't want to jam Blood Moon on turn 3 when it's kind of exposed, Maybe you want to do something different. And that sort of thing, I think, is super important to this and doesn't get talked about enough. So I'm glad that Abe kind of hit on it there.
I want to kind of actually add to that. I'm going to back up to it too, where Abe, you also mentioned like kind of this nebulous part before the tournament, like before you write down that guide, and or before you even ask for the guide. And for me, like a lot of the times when I'm practicing, like my sideboard is nebulous. Like I'm like changing sideboard cards, main deck cards a bunch, whether it's on the ladder or whether it's between leagues, and just trying to figure out like, okay, what is this matchup about, right? And then adjusting my sideboard accordingly. And then maybe before a big event, this happened a lot, like when GPs were a thing, and it happens for me now, like before I sit down for maybe an RCQ, and I think it'll happen before this RC. But like, what do I think these matchups are about, and do I have the appropriate sideboard plans accordingly? And that's how I build your own sideboard guide. That's how I build my sideboard guides. And we have a whole episode on this, I think, with the three of us on how to build your own sideboard guide. I highly recommend that. But the sideboard plan thing, it's a plan. It's not like it's not a rock hard thing. It is understanding. It goes back to the things we talked about earlier, right? It's matchup knowledge. What is this matchup about? And do I have a sideboard plan that fits that? The last one for things before the event, I think I'm gonna shout out a really old podcast. It's called The A-Team. Like KYT, Scotty Mack, Jay Boosh, Jonathan Medina. They did this thing where they every week would play a game called Sneak, Keep, or Ditch. One of them would take a standard deck, draw an opening hand, and ask Sneap, which is Snap Keep, Keep, which is like, yeah, I would keep this, or Ditch, like I'm going to mulligan this. And I used to do this on the way to every single PTQ for like an hour of the like 6-hour drive. Like we would just talk about not inappropriate, actually maybe it was the appropriate number of hands, where the time I got to the event, I knew exactly what the hands were that were appropriate in the format after a lengthy discussion with all 5 of us in a compact car talking about it. I think this is something that you should know before your big event. But Mason, I want to pitch it to you. Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's sorry. Yeah, I think it's important to know the range of keepable hands, especially like in game ones, where you kind of need to know what your deck is trying to do and what you are allowed to keep. So I think like a really good example of this is sort of Hammer in current modern, where kind of in the dark, apropos of nothing, I will try and keep hands that always have at least a hammer or an equipper, and I won't keep hands that don't have that are 7 cards, especially with the London Mulligan. And if I have a 7 card hand, it has to have a really good reason as to mulligan it. So an example might be like, I don't know, if I had, a couple land Springleaf Drum Esper Sentinel, like that's not really keepable. But if I had like 3 lands, 4 Esper Sentinels, that might be something that's like, okay, this is worth keeping about. This is sort of weird. And it would take something like that for me to sort of want to mulligan. And even then, I'm not even really for my plan. If my opponent, has a lot of creatures, this could be invalidated. And so I try to know what my deck is trying to do in game ones, and then sort of tying into sideboard plans and post board. It's really important to sort of know what am I trying to do in the games post board, and kind of tying into plan and format knowledge and matchup knowledge, and can my hand facilitate that? We've talked about in the past how a lot of games are won and lost in the mulligan, and how that's such an important step of the game, and the range of keepable hands and knowing what you're trying to do, I think matters here a lot as well.
Yeah, I think that especially when it comes to this range of keepable hands, like that's something that you can absolutely have an idea of before the event, because that's something that, like you said, Spencer, you don't actually have to play any games to really determine for yourself. I remember there was a regionals where I was playing Tron because I had like finals all week or like projects due all week in college, and I was like, I'm going to play a deck where the only thing I have to do is really think about my mulligans, and it's pretty well positioned, and hopefully I'll do fine.
Dude, that was
an open.
I gotta call this out. I actually had this exact same thing when I came back to Modern, and I played a Modern challenge, cashed the Modern challenge with this exact same thought process on Tron.
Yeah, I mean, I got top 16 in an open doing this, and I cashed the regionals doing this, where it was just like, yep, this is the only thing I have time to pre-plan for, and because of the nature of Tron, that was good enough. Not to keep on talking about Hammer so much. Now that Mason is also a Hammer guy, but it's good to set rules for yourself about, for some decks, of what are the hands you can keep, especially a deck that's kind of like a combo deck in Hammer, but especially in matchups, knowing like if you're playing blue-white control and you're playing against a Renin 6 deck and you're on the play and you keep a hand that can't answer a turn 2 Renin 6, that's probably a mistake, right? And if I ask you, hey, what happens when you're looking at this hand if your opponent plays Renin 6 on turn 2, a card that because they're playing against blue-white control, they're going to want to develop on turn 2 because it's such a powerful card advantage engine. You're like, well, I guess I just lose to that. Well, maybe you should have considered the fact that that's likely to happen in making your plan for the kinds of hands you're looking for are. And that's really something you can think about on a conceptual level, using that format knowledge, using the matchup knowledge to your advantage, in the same way that, whenever I sit down and play against Murktide, which happens a lot it happened a lot to me this RCQ season, playing in the top 8, knowing my opponent was on Murktide, knowing that I'm on the draw and looking at my hand and saying, does this have the important cards? Does this have the Urza Saga, the Esper Sentinel I'm looking for? If I'm playing its matchup, is my plan of Stoneforge for Cauldron Complete going to be strong enough here? Thinking those things all the way through, and knowing that even before you shuffle up and draw your hand in a match, is such a big difference maker. And it's something you can absolutely kind of figure out for yourself and set rules for yourself with, that will lead to you avoiding those spots of, yeah, the hand was really close and I think I made the wrong decision, because you'll have already thought about making the right decision.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that was really popular early on in our Discord, and maybe I'll make a whole channel for this was a question, right? Like people were questioning their keeps, and like I'll make a whole channel for this in the Patreon Discord, but I think this is really, really important. I think it is the easiest way to gain percentage points. What about during the event? We have a couple points during the event. Maybe like, well, what do you mean? This is pre-planning, but you can actually pre-plan during the event too. There are things that you can do that you are still pre-planning before your match, and the first one we want to talk about is yucky subject that I talked about recently that has actually helped me a ton and has helped some of my teammates a ton, and that's scouting. I have a Discord with a couple of local players where every RCQ, our team knows every deck list and every opponent before we sit down. After round 1, I know every single person's deck list. I'm able to see my opponent. I am able to then say, okay, they're on this deck, and I can mulligan accordingly. I know it's yucky. I know people don't like it, but it's a thing that happens. Abe, I'm gonna pitch it to you because I do it, so I'm not gonna pretend like I don't.
And I think I mentioned this on the show maybe 2 or 3 months ago, but I was at an RCQ and someone who I'm not going to name because I don't really want to name them for it, but someone was there and they had just gone around after finishing their match and written down the deck list of every player that they could recognize, whose name they could get, in a notebook, and then right before playing my win in for top 8, came up to me and was like, oh, hey, your opponent's on this, by the way, and showed me it. And I was like, especially, when it comes to RCQs, if I've decided that my goal is to win, and this is available to me, then, am I really doing everything I can if I'm not trying to know and trying to use the information available to me? And if you're someone who doesn't decide this is for you, it is something that's kind of a bit of a gray area of tournament ethics. There's a lot of discussion that happens about it on Twitter a lot, especially at higher level events. But if you know that you can know what you're playing against, it is something available to you.
Can I talk about this for a second?
I have friends who will come to events not even to play, just because they're close and want to come hang out, who will do this for us, and it has been really helpful.
Yeah. As a player that is prominent in their local community, everyone knows what I'm playing after round 1. Everyone. It is talked about in the tournament room what Spencer is playing. It happens. I've heard people come up to me, hey, why did you pick that? The people that were on the opposite side of the room, people just talk about what I'm playing. So I want to be clear that I don't feel bad. If you're all going to tell everybody what I'm playing, I don't feel bad saying okay, well, I'm going to know what everybody in the room is playing then. I know I get that it's gray, but I just want to be clear that I don't think it's that gray when everyone gets. I think Mason's probably under the same boat. Everyone knows what Mason's playing after round 1.
Well, yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts. First, I don't think it's ethically gray. I think we're actually doing a disservice to the listeners by painting it as such. I don't think it's gray.
You think it's black and white? It's fine?
It's fine.
Okay, good. I'm in agreement with Mason. I'm glad we got there.
I think people treat it as ethically gray.
Yeah, that's why I think and don't cut it for what it's worth. That's why I think
I think it's fine.
Disservice painting it that way, because we're if you're listening to this podcast, you at least value something. What we're saying, we're giving it for the first time, and you got this far, and maybe you bounce off it here, maybe you don't. But it's whatever. Personally, I don't scout. I if I get up, I'll walk around the room and look at what people are playing and playing with people, but I don't try to write it down or do anything like that. I just sort of know, and then via playing the tournament, I'll kind of figure it out. But at big events where people come up to me before the tournament's even started, and they're so what made you pick Hammer this week? Or
right.
And that stuff's out, and it's at bigger events. And I remember something that Harlan Fear mentioned, where he's just yeah, all my opponents know what I'm playing. It just doesn't matter, He was number 2, I think he lost playing for Player of the Year to Zan Syed that year, where both players in the SCG circuit, all their deck lists are out on Twitter all the time. Those things weren't paywalled. It was the cyborg guides that were, those cyborg guides that are paywalled. And clearly you could succeed when that's even with that information out there. And my information's out there too, and that's sort of the same guide that I go when it comes to monetization of Magic, where it's my deck list is free, the cyborg guide and sort of the thoughts and everything else, that's what's paywalled. And so anyone, and there happy to follow me, and they can spend me $5 and I'll tell them exactly what I'm playing, including my sideboard. I just don't care.
It's the same thing, right? Like, you can look at my exact deck list. If you're a patron of CCMTG, I probably posted my deck list in our Discord before an event. The thing that happens here is, like, we talked about mulligan decisions like a minute ago, right? And if you get to mulligan against me, I want the same opportunity. And I don't think that that's scummy of me.
Yeah, I don't think it's scummy. I also just, it is what it is. Playing an open deck list tournament has just reinforced that
Right.
players are really bad with using the information that they have.
True.
And when I get to play open deck list versus people, unless my opponent's really good, it often feels way easier, and it validates to me the people that are like, wow, open deck list, like the rich get richer. And it's like, it's true, but it's also learnable. So like,
no, it's so true. I think open deck list is like the next talking point, right? Like, during the event, if you have an open deck list, we talked about sideboard plans, we talked about deck lists, we talked about range of keepable hands, we talked about format knowledge, matchup knowledge. Like, all of that comes into play with open deck lists.
Yeah, I mean, as someone, I played I played the RC. I was about to say the first, but I guess it's the only one we've had. So I played the RC in his open deck list. I guess what was that, like a month ago now, month and a half. And every single round, I read all my opponent's cards in their deck and their sideboard. And the reason I read, before game one, because if you didn't play the RC, you would hand the deck list and you would have like 2 minutes to look at it, and then hand it back, and then you can look at it again during sideboarding. And I would read their whole main deck and look. And I'd read every card and make sure I knew what all the cards were, which was typically very easy. I'd look for anything that's weird. And then the sideboards, even before game one started, I looked at their sideboard to get a feel for how they thought of the matchup. If they have a bunch of sideboard cards for the matchup, they might not feel very confident about it and think it's a weaker point, and there might be something I can exploit that maybe I didn't catch up in the first game. So I would check the sideboard for that and go back over. And it was very helpful multiple times. Like, it's very easy to like start reading the red black list, and it's like your eyes glaze over and you miss that it's 3 graveyard trespassers instead of 4, and there's like a main deck go blank, which is like, actually I think it was 2 and 1 go blank, and then like 1 evoke despair for the person had. And it's like, that's big information for me to know, and it means that things like putting a Arclight Phoenix in the graveyard is maybe less of a threat, less of a problem in the early turn, because they're gonna have to spend the turn go blanking to punish it and not developing and punishing. And like, that changed the way I play. So,
well, I think this is, I actually got a message about like online tournaments and how the SCG was like really fueling that for a little bit. And one of the things that I talked about is like, I think that people really hated online deck lists to the point where people are a little afraid to go to Melee to like run their events. But I actually think it's great. Like, I think that it really rewards what you just talked about, right? You talked about like almost level 2 of this, Mason. Where level 1 is what my like mulligan decisions. Level 2 is like, okay, how are they going to play the matchup according to how their deck looks? But I think that there's another level beyond that in like, okay, how are they going to play the matchup after game 1? Like, how are they going to do this now? And I think that open deck list is, in my opinion, like the future of Magic. I actually think it's better. There are things that it hurts.
Spikier.
It is spikier, and I'm a spike. There are things that it hurts, but I'm a brewer too, right? Like, I've qualified for the Pro Tour with like a literal deck list that no human would ever play again. But I still think that there's a level of, it is okay if you know that I'm doing something nonsensical if you can't combat my nonsense. And I also think that like that matchup knowledge, format knowledge, I mean, we open deck lists. We talked about deck lists earlier. Like, what is a reasonable deck list? Well, what if it's not reasonable? Like, what if this is actually nonsensical? I think that open deck lists during the event lets you do the things that you pre-planned for before the event started. Abe?
Yeah, I had a lot of success during the Lotus Box series a couple years ago, where that was the first time I'd ever really played open deck list tournaments. and Mason was one of my victims along the way. But I won quite a few of my matches just by looking at how my opponent built their deck, looking at all the cards in it, knowing what to play around at all times, knowing how they were going to sideboard and sideboarding accordingly, and just being able to do things like that in open deck lists is, in that sense, it's not even like pre-planning because they're giving you the information there. But those same skills that you use in pre-planning, that is the whole thing, right? When you have the access to the deck list, which is really what, maybe not in the exact sense of every card, but when you come in knowing all the things you could know about what you're going to be looking at come time to sit down for the match, that is about as valuable as it gets. And really, when you pre-plan effectively and you're doing all these things outside of when you've sat down and shuffled up to be as prepared as you can be for the matches you're playing, it really does show through in the fact that, like, sure, you don't have to scout someone or scout everyone to know, like, yeah, that ringer in your area who always plays Murktide, they're always playing Murktide. And therefore, you need to know your Murktide matchup. And you know that this week they were talking about bringing in Blood Moons, or they have the Blood Moons main deck instead of the Archmage's Charms. And for those reasons, you're going to play accordingly. The fact that you took in that information before you sat down to play your match, that is going to matter. And that, like, really is the whole point of it, right? That is the whole principle.
All right, our last point is discussing how you play versus a deck that you see. I'm going to be honest. I have literally had known who my top 8 opponent was at an RCQ or a PPTQ or I don't know, whatever the alphabet is, where somebody else had a similar deck sleeved up, and we just actually played games, talked about games and sideboarding before top 8. Like, that's just happened for me. And this is that thing, like, we're talking about things during the event. That is the thing you can do. Like, you get to look at the seed, like, especially if you're undefeated, you have a pretty good idea of, like, the range of 3 decks that you get to play against in the top 8. I've done this a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I added this point to the show, and what Spencer's saying is true, but also when thinking about it, it's something to think about, like, maybe if you're playing against, like, someone like who is Spencer, who's like a brewer and is playing like a weirder or more off the wall build of a deck, or presented some sort of new deck to the format and it's brought some standard deck or whatever, and you just have time. Or before, it's funny, in the things before the event that you can play, and Spencer led the question at the very beginning of this show with is it on you to do these things? And the answer to all of those, if you didn't figure out, was yes, it's on you, and you should do all these before the event things. But sometimes you can do all that stuff, and then a guy brings Naya Werewolves to your standard RCQ, and you need to figure out, what do Naya Werewolves do? How do I fight these? And, like, watching their deck, talking to your friends, trying to discuss it is the thing to do, even if, like, regardless of how good you think the deck is, it's something there, and it's a way to, like, effectively use your time, and, like, you realistically could get paired with this person. So this is really what I was sort of thinking about, is, like, when you see something weirder, and sometimes you'll see this happen at events where, like, Lotus Box all brought Prisontron, like, what's that? Like, and, like, a lot of people will be like, oh, whatever. But, like, discussing, like, oh, how would I fight? We're thinking about how would I play against Prisontron is important. You get paired against someone on Lotus Box and they're playing it. You have a little bit of pre-knowledge, even if it's maybe not as much as you would have liked.
First of all, I love the shout out to the Naya Werewolves almost finish. But, like, legitimately, if you want to beat that, just play Grixis, by the way. It's actually a terrible matchup. I think that something that's really hard for people to understand is, like, I think we've brought it up multiple times without actually calling it out. This is why networking is important. Like, if you're going to play against Amulet Titan, and you know a person that plays Amulet Titan, just go ask them. Especially if they're not your opponent. Like, just go walk up to them and say, what is this matchup about, and how am I supposed to do it? I think it's easy. I think that that one, they'll appreciate it. One of the things I've learned about Magic players is like if you respect somebody enough to like ask them their opinion on a matchup, especially if you're about to play it, you're about to make a friend for life. Like you're legit about to be like, hey, I don't know what this is about. Can you help me? This person will not only do that, but they'll be like, oh, this person respects me. I can come to them for the same type of question. I think that's really important. Abe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just overall, you know, offloading the things that you have to think about for the first time and that you don't have the time to think about when you're sitting down and playing the match, that's really the whole point of this episode, is really thinking about all the things that you could know and that matter to your success, that you can spend your time and energy thinking about before the tournament. And sometimes you'll show up to a tournament and, you know, everyone's playing Scam, and no one in your area usually plays Scam. You haven't played against Scam online at all, and you need to talk to your friends about, hey, I have no idea how to board in the Scam matchup. And this has happened, countless times in countless events, and you spend that time then and there with your friends before you have to sit down for the match and figure out on, just figuring it out what the Scam matchup is actually like. And instead, you get access to more perspectives, to the people and to the content creators and to the resources that you have outside of the match in order to help you think about that. And bringing that with you into the match is going to make you a better and more well-rounded Magic player in that match and make better decisions in that match. And that will lead to just more and more of your success down the line. Because really, there's only so much Magic that is really played at the table. And a lot of it, and what really sets the best players apart, is not only their ability to play the good Magic at the table, because that's necessary, but it's the ability to play the game and think about the game away from the table and take that into their matches and make the good decisions in the matches, because they've offloaded, so much of the intricate, hard decisions into theoretical concepts through multiple perspectives, through the expertise of their friends who play these decks or don't play the decks or have a good perspective on it. Finding that truth is easier to do as a group than alone, and really having access to all of the resources available to you when you're making those kinds of big strategic decisions that lead in your at table play is absolutely everything. And if you're not taking every opportunity you have to do that to help yourself succeed, you should start doing that, because you'll just start seeing more and more returns. Yep.
That is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much to both of you. I actually thought that was a really fun one. Our Patreon question this week comes from Yeoman5. He asks, what are your pre-tournament rituals or habits? I'm going to go first. I hate going to a tournament without sitting down for breakfast. This is maybe something that is inappropriate from old school PTQs, where we would go to breakfast, make sure we had a good breakfast before PTQs. But I will literally, even for RCQs, now I have to sit down, have a good breakfast, kind of relax, and it's a lot. And then maybe down a Rockstar Orange. That's my pre-tournament. And then additionally, I think that one of my habits is giving everybody a hello, making sure that the people around me know, hey, I hope we're in for a good tournament. I know that sounds weird, but I think too often people get inside their own heads where they think that the tournament's about them, and the truth is the tournament is about the tournament. And I really try to go around the room, say hello to people, and make sure that everybody feels welcome, and is ready for the day. What about you, Abe?
Yeah, I'm a coffee guy. I don't actually drink coffee any other time in my daily life. I don't drink coffee at work. I don't do caffeine normally, but when it comes to tournament days, I do like to have a good bit of caffeine just to stay alert, keep that pep in my step. Breakfast is maybe. I'm a big playlist builder. I really, for all of 2018 and 2019 on the SG tour, I had a 5-song playlist of all new songs. There was also a way to equip myself to listen to more music, But it's songs that were like fresh to me, that really like made me excited to play, that really kept me, in my zone and in my flow state. And so, yeah, jamming out to music, palling around with, especially local RCQs, like pounding around with the local community, cracking jokes, writing out my deck list, making sure I picked all the cards right, and like all that is really my pre-tournament ritual. It's the coffee, the maybe breakfast, the music, and then the camaraderie.
What are you, Mason?
It's changed a lot over the years, but nowadays basically it's just I kind of eat something. Maybe it's a banana, maybe it's a granola bar, who knows? I just go and talk to people, and then I sit down and win some matches. That's my habits at the tournament. I don't know what y'all.
Wow. Wow.
22.
No, but like jokes aside, like I kind of just go and talk to people. I don't really do much else, and then tournament starts. That's kind of my whole rich.
Phil asks, actually, there's more than just that question here. Great episode. This was actually, I just want to shout out our guest, Connor, last week. This comes from that episode. Great episode. How do you guys pick events to go to? I can't decide what format to play because RCQs are so many different formats. I'm going to tell you guys how I read this question. I think this question is saying to prepare at local events. Like how to pick which local events because of your RCQ. And my answer to that question is don't do that. You should just support the stores locally that you want to support and then prepare however you can for your next event. Whether that be software that cannot be named on this podcast, whether that be Moto, whether it be Arena. Like, my answer to this question is support your local store. Like, if you want to go to a weekly event or a couple, just go to those. Like, go to the ones that you want, for the stores you want to support. Do not use local store events to prepare for your RCQs. Because you are not going to be at that store for your RCQ except for that store's RCQ. So, that is my answer. Mason?
I would just go to all the ones I can, and this goes back to the thing we talked about before about like what are your goals in Magic and what are you trying to do. And the way I read this question, and I'm trying to figure out like the difference here, is sounds to me like maybe there's too many events going on at the same time, or maybe you can only do one event a weekend and there's like two. And just assuming you can't do both. And with that being the case, I would just play whichever one I think I have the highest win rate at. I'm going to have the highest win rate at, and furthermore, whichever one's the closest to me, so I spend the less time driving. It's not really helpful,
no,
like,
that could be
the most convenient to you.
That could be true too. Like, I did not think of it like they had multiple RCQ options. That could be true. I had not thought of that.
Yeah, that's also how I read the question. But also, I know that my area is really RCQ dense. Like, we have a lot of scheduling conflicts because no one will run an RCQ on Sunday except for like one store in the state of Maryland. Which
I fixed that here.
No sense.
And I'm in Utah, so let's go. Shout out to Spencer.
And you're killing me because honestly, I don't understand what happened to Sunday tournaments, but we got to bring them back.
Dude, straight up,
give me the back-to-back week.
I'm gonna be honest.
Into one side of the state.
I'm gonna be honest. I had to fight this. So we didn't get to do coverage this weekend because I was sick yesterday. Do you know the difference between the Sunday and Saturday RCQ at Game Grid Lehigh for 2K in players?
Zero different.
There was actually a zero difference in players. It was the exact same number of players.
It's like people forgot that
the
best part, the only good part of PBQ season was just firing bullets all weekend and coming home and going back to your life on Monday.
What's even crazier is I live in Utah. Like, so for those who know, Utah's like home to Mormons, which are not supposed to do things on Sunday. Like, you're just supposed to go to church, spend family time, like, and because of that, like, people are like, oh, we can't run Sunday events in Utah But I was like, that's not true. Salt Lake is only like 40% Mormon. You should run events on Sunday. Turns out the Magic community is less Mormon than not Mormon. And actually, Sunday events have the exact same number of attendance as Saturday tournaments in Utah. You just have to champion it, Abe. You got to go out to your local game store and be like,
all 20 stores.
I do. This is literally, this is actually what I do. So for what it's worth, it is actually what I do.
We had 3 RCQs on Saturday in Tennessee.
You had 3 RCQs on the same day?
That happened to me. 3 hours.
Dude,
of them all an hour drive away.
If you are listening to this podcast, listen to me right now. You need to literally walk up to your store owner and literally just explain the math to them. You could be the only one on the Sunday. Like, it's not even hard math.
Yeah.
Why do they do this?
When all these required judges, and the judges could only be scheduled for one event at a time. Anyway, to answer your question, Phil, I would say that it really does depend on your goals. If you have a format that you want to play and really want to master, I would say go and play the event of that format. You know, if there's a modern RCQ, and, you know, I'm assuming prizes are roughly the same. If you think that you're going to steal on your prize support at, like, one of these stores or whatever, or one of them is paying out in cash and the other one's paying out in packs, then, like, you want the cash more than the packs if you're winning, or if you're missing on the invite, then I would say to go do that. But if you're choosing between, like, Modern and Pioneer at 2 roughly individual stores, if your goal is to just play the one format that you're really trying to master, that you're invested in, that your time's invested in, that you want to be better at, go and play that one by all means, even if it'll be harder, even if it'll be, there's not as many slots in it. But if that's what you care about, that's what you should be doing. If you care about qualifying the most, then I would start to think about, okay, which one of the 2 formats do I think I'm better at? Which one do I think will be higher attended? Which of these 2 is going to be a harder or softer event? Which one has more slots, therefore more opportunities, less matches I have to win to actually qualify, and make the decision that way. But ultimately, when it comes to me and the way that I decide, because I feel so comfortable in all of the RCQ formats in my area, I really just go down to, like, slots, prize support. I'm really big on supporting places that'll give out, like, cash or store credit, because I really want to support those stores and what they're doing, because they're taking a big risk on running an event that does that. Events with judges, just pick the ones that are, like, really the ones you want to support, and go do that.
I think that's the same thing that I was trying to say, for what it's worth. Like, maybe I misread this question, but, like, I made a post on Facebook and Twitter about Utah. Our sponsor, right, like Game Grid Lehigh specifically, ran the last 2 weekends available for RCQs. The last 2 days, not even the last 2 weekends, like the literal last weekend. They were like, we're going to take both days, and we're going to give out flight and hotel to first place for both, and we're going to give out like $1,000 in prizes to the rest of it, no matter how big it is. I think that Utah had 6 stores, I think, that gave out either $1,000 in cash or credit, flight and hotel, or $1,000 cash. Like, you should support those stores. Like, support the things that make your community better. I don't know. I think that is the answer to this question. And honestly, like, what's crazy to me is that I'll give you some behind the scenes. Jordan, the owner of Game Grid Lehigh, was like, I will never run a standard event. Both of his RCQs were standard. The thing I covered was standard. He was like, no, it's a standard RC. We're going to do standard. I just think that, like, supporting the local competitive scene is so important at this point in Magic's history. It is actually paramount. That's what you should be doing. You can check out the rest of the network. Common Knowledge is coming back. They've been missing some weeks due to personal issues. Drafting Archetypes just dropped their swag store, so if you're a fan of that show, check out their swag store. Honestly, Mythicast is coming back at the beginning of next year. Me and Michaela are going to be doing it once a month, so it'll be a monthly podcast with me and her. If you love the show, like, subscribe, and go to freaking Spotify. Apparently, Spotify has reviews now, Mason.
Yeah, we did this bit last week.
All right.
A review.
Well, I'm going to do it again.
You want to do it with me this time?
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Abe, Spotify. I'm going to edit. I'm not going to edit this out. Abe, you also get to tell me how can we leave a review?
Yeah, you open it up on the app.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
You're listening. You just give us a review, baby, right on the constructive criticism page.
Actually, one of the things that I like about Spotify, over it's not iTunes, it's Apple Podcasts. You actually have to listen to the podcast before they'll let you leave a review.
Yeah,
on.
So right after you're done listening to this episode, right after we get through the last 2 minutes here while we wrap up, it's going to be like, did you like that? Was that good for you? And you're going to be like, 5 stars, baby.
Mason's giving 5 stars.
As good as it gets.
Let's give us 5 stars.
Let's go! All right. If people want to find you, we're going to do that.
You can find me over at twitter.com/morenothings. DMs are still open for coaching. Please hit me up. I would love to help you as much as with anything from hammer to any deck to big concepts like I was talking about in this episode and always improving. Would love to help you improve your game. Just send me a DM on Twitter.
Mason.
You can find me each and every week over at Card Kingdom writing an article. This week we have standard stuff. So if you're interested in standard, maybe we're trying to queue via the online RCQs this weekend. Stand your chance to do that. You want to check that out. Check me out at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. You can find me for coaching by emailing me masonclark@gmail.com or reaching out to me on Twitter at MasonEClark. I officially have the OG Twitter account back. Musk unbanned me. A little good, a little bad comes with the Wild Musk Town on Twitter. And that is going to be it. If you are interested in coaching, I am sort of locking down slots for until about March. And I'm kind of locking in some people. I had kind of a lot of crazy stuff going on with life around that time. And so it's going to be hard to do it, but I'm kind of getting people the chance to get in. So if you're interested in that, reach out. We can talk about it.
I have about 6 slots left. I did get some coaching after last week. So if you are looking for coaching, hit me up. Mason's busy. I don't play Hammer. Go to Abe for that. But if you're looking for like really fundamental, like how do I build that, hit me up at Spencer13H. You can find me every other week on the Need to Nerd podcast and every month on the Smash 3 podcast for Smash Bros. Ultimate, and then next year again on Mythicast. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and we'll see you guys all next week with another episode of Constructed Criticism.